You're listening to Philosophy Talk. We're discussing Kierkegaard with Lanier Anderson from Stanford University.
We've talked about who Kierkegaard was and his idea of a leap of faith. Faith and reason, or faith versus reason, is a time-honored philosophical issue. In our next segment, we'll dig deeper into this perennial question and what Kierkegaard has to say about it.
Faith, reason, and your calls and emails when Philosophy Talk continues.
A leap of faith, a major idea, a concept Bruce Springsteen got from Søren Kierkegaard, the great philosopher. Sometimes we focus on individual thinkers. Today, Kierkegaard is our man. I'm John Perry. This is Philosophy Talk, the program that questions everything.
Except your intelligence. I'm Ken Taylor. Our guest is Lanier Anderson from Stanford University.
Lanier, it seems to me that most philosophers of religion, from Augustine to Aquinas to our own contemporary Robert Adams, typically attempt to reconcile faith and reason. Where does Kierkegaard fit into this, or does he just not fit into it?
It seems like he's trying to drive them as far apart as possible.
He's trying to drive them as far apart as possible. He thinks that that whole tradition is on the wrong track because what is demanded of us is not to reduce God to our level and make God's religion turn out to be just what reason would demand. He thinks that what God's demanding of us is to humiliate our reason and rest our faith in Him.
So the problematic that we think of as the philosophy of religion, starting at least with Augustine, going through Aquinas and so many others, he just thinks is wrong-headed.
He thinks that those people didn't understand what was important about the genuine orthodox tradition in the faith. He thinks that they're corrupting the faith.
1-800-525...
This is why he got in such trouble with the Danish church.
1-800-525-9917 or email us at comments@philosophytalk.org. And Judy from Berkeley's on the line. Welcome to Philosophy Talk, Judy.
Okay, thanks. What bothers me is that Abraham, in his leap of faith, was stepping outside his own situation and killing another human being. Why does his leap of faith have to take his son's life? That should be personal.
That's a term in that for Kierkegaard, just so you know. The teleological suspension of the ethical. He was stepping outside of the ethical. But Lanier, explain to Judy what's going on.
So the teleological suspension of the ethical is the thought that the ethical could be suspended, that is, rejected, in favor of some higher purpose, namely God's faith. And I think the reason that the story is supposed to be so powerful, or anyway, that's Kierkegaard's interpretation, is precisely this disturbing aspect of it that Judy has picked out. It's because what Abraham is asked to do is so awful that his willingness to do it is supposed to be so great and so high.
So a modern Bay Area person might think of the leap of faith as drinking the Kool-Aid. Christine Ellis points out, because there's this analogy with the people at Jonestown that followed their leaders' insistence, all drank the Kool-Aid and died. Does Kierkegaard have any test, any criterion Abraham could have used, or he could use, or I could use to tell when we're being talked to by God and when we're being talked to by a charlatan?
Well, there's no test, and that's why faith is risky and great when you have it. It's all about whether, in fact, you are in the proper individual relationship to God or not. And if you ask for some criterion, some test that your reason could assess, then you're asking for the wrong kind of attitude.
Another interesting email from Paul. In Plato's famous Apologia of Socrates, Socrates explains that he's acting in response to his demon. Would not count as a leap of faith, and also Socrates is one of the people that Kierkegaard refers to a lot.
Kierkegaard loves that fact about Socrates, although of course Socrates can't count as the genuine knight of faith because he's not a Christian. But Kierkegaard thinks that he was dimly aware of the need for such a thing, and that came out in his relation to that demon.
I want to pick up on the look. Kierkegaard wants a demanding is offering. I don't know if he wants, but he's offering, and he believes in a very demanding Christianity.
That's right.
I mean, it's a very demanding thing because your reason, which is an instrument, I guess, that God has given you, right? I guess it's to faith. It's sort of like perception, or perception tells you all these things, and sometimes your reason says no, that's just wrong, and you have to go with your reason. Well, faith sometimes reason tells you these things, and faith says no, that's not what God wants, and your reason says but that's what I think, and you have to submerge it. I mean, you just have to submerge it, and reason's always going to object. It's always going to object, but that's just like a child objecting to the parent. But until you get to see that faith is this highest achievement, and you're always going to be puzzled by this. I mean, so it is a very, very demanding Christianity.
I think that's right. And what I really like is this thought that until you get to see that faith is higher than reason, you'll never be willing to suspend your reason in this way. And of course, he can't give you a reason that will underwrite this claim that faith is higher than your reason. That would be exactly to make the mistake. So what I think of Kierkegaard as doing is showing the internal logic of a non-rationalist, fideist, faith-based position, but all he can do, he can't argue you by reason into that position. He's trying to provoke you into that position by showing you something about how glorious faith would be.
Alexei from Oakland's on the line. Welcome to Philosophy Talk, Alexei.
Hi, thank you. Yes, I think that people make leaps of faith all the time, but to use the example of Abraham is rather extreme. I think people make leaps of faith in order to find out how it's going to work out, and I think this is a common thing. And in some sense, it's quite irrational that you don't know all the factors. You jump in, and you see how things work out. This is not uncommon. Such a huge an extreme example as Abraham certainly is consonant with Kierkegaard's personality, but I think it's a very very unrealistic sort of thing, and I think it's not necessary to posit such a thing, and also not to necessarily think that there's such a great gap between reason and faith.
Thanks for the call, Alexei. What do you think, Lanier?
I guess I agreed with everything Alexei said right up into the last thing about the gap between reason and faith. I think it's right that Abraham is a very extreme case, and that Kierkegaard self-consciously presents it as a very extreme case. And I think Kierkegaard does want us to recognize the important role of similar kinds of attitudes in our life. So think again of falling in love. When you fall in love with somebody, you can't talk yourself into love by enumerating all the reasons that the person that you think you're in love with is a good person. When you fall in love with somebody, you're making a kind of bet, just like Alexei suggested, that if I keep engaging with this person, my life will be better in the future, and that bet outstrips whatever reasons you have.
And I think, and to Alexei again, I think you have to realize how consequential for Kierkegaard this leap of faith is. It is the only thing. It is the only thing that will ground a self. I mean, without the leap of faith, you're selfless. You're running from yourself. You might try, if you have a certain kind of despair, you might think you were like king of yourself. You can constitute yourself, figure out what you want, what you value, what you are, but it's always, he says, subject to change and rebellion. And the only stable thing is this direct relation to God through Christ, and Christ is the only real model of selfhood that we have available. And he's very serious about that.
That's true. He's very serious about it. But look, Alexei's right that it's not always as extreme a case. We're not always in as extreme a situation as Abraham was. And because it's so crucial to us, Kierkegaard wants us to know that even in more ordinary circumstances, we still are required to have this kind of attitude.
So we've got an email that poses kind of a meta question here. The title of the email is How Philosophy Talk is Like Sunday School, which might give you a sense of where Tenku, who the email is from. He says, while the discussion of old, moldering, ignorant philosophers of yesteryear is fascinating, It ultimately yields nothing about the nature of the human condition any more than endless discussion of Aristotle and Ptolemy leads to any insight about dynamics and cosmology. All these people are ignorant of modern science. I mean, what's the point? So you guys teach courses on Kierkegaard, apparently. You invite undergraduates to take their units and spill them down the Kierkegaard chute instead of taking geology or science. What's your excuse for this?